Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me right now? Everything is all right? Yeah. Okay. So once again, we meet this Friday, and this is a rather special Friday, of course, because it is the holiday Juneteenth, which is the day in 1865 in Galveston, Texas, when the slaves were freed, and it actually marked the final day, perhaps I think, of the Civil War. Is everything? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, we're dealing with technical issues this morning. I read a little bit about the holiday. So this is here. This is one thing. I was hoping to get this all in better form, but somehow my printer stopped working. So anyway, although Abraham Lincoln had signed and issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, and it was formally issued in 1863, it did not reach Texas until 1865. And in fact, this is what I'm reading now because I don't remember this offhand, that news of General Robert E. Lee's surrender, which was on April 9th, 1865, didn't reach Texas and the Western Army until June 2nd of that year. On June 18th, General Gordon Granger arrived at Galveston Island. It's in Texas, of course, for those of you who are not familiar with Texas, and read aloud the contents of General Order Number 3, that in accordance with the proclamation of the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. That was quite a remarkable day, I would say, and of course, it led to great celebrations in Texas and then throughout the United States. And it is actually recognized as state holidays in 49 of the 50 states right now. But it is a holiday which most of us, which I say, white folk, actually didn't really know about. And that's tremendous embarrassment. I feel that as a very great personal embarrassment. And I'm now doing actually a lot of reading and a lot of research to sort of rectify my ignorance. And it's something that I encourage everyone to do. So this is a special day. However, in the United States, still the pandemic is hardly under control, although in New York State and New York City, it's actually much better than it has been in the past. And New York is on schedule to open, and as I mentioned always, that creates quite a difficult time because people tend to forget, we all tend to forget that when we open, we still have to be vigilant because the virus is still very present. And in fact, in certain states in the States right now, it is the number of hospitalizations is increasing in a very dangerous and scary rate, I would say. And along with the demonstrations for a much more fair society and against, of course, the systemic racial violence and racial prejudice that has been so much a part of this country. There's also very bizarre, I feel, in cultural war over masks, where you have one side saying we must wear masks, which of course makes unbelievably perfect sense, considering that even recent studies have shown that just by wearing masks you can cut down the transmission of the disease by over 40%. I think something is happening here, right?
Turn off the sound.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. I do that, and then we'll have to redo this later. While there are people who think that freedom means that we should not wear a mask. That's unbelievably odd kind of conception, I would say. It's as if we say that, okay, I have the freedom to infect other people and perhaps to cause death. That's very odd thing to think. And I believe that the problem we have is that freedom has different, not only meanings, but different senses. So there's a freedom to, and there's also a freedom from. So we can have the freedom from poverty, we can have the freedom from disease, but perhaps we do not have a freedom to abuse other people. Okay, perhaps that's enough of that. And we get along now to our major topics, which are many too many today. And as I mentioned in my notice, I'd like to continue with Brahms because I realized that I didn't really get to what I wanted to talk about, particularly to the main point of the sense of structure that Brahms creates. And that is how that creates in itself expression. And are things working out okay? Yeah, all right, good. I see things and I go, oh, maybe everything's not working. Okay, so how Brahms creates expression through structure, and of course he's not alone with this. All music works this way, but Brahms is a wonderful example because I think his notation expresses this structure in a way, and that's what I will explain, and expresses not only the structure but the expression of the structure and creates the emotion that we need. And finally, that it explains his I should say, allergy to the metronome. And of course, that cannot mean that his music has no rhythm. There's not rhythm. But that there's a sense of elasticity which comes with emotion and is built into the structure of the music. Okay, so before that, I wanted to just show this because people were asking about Fanny Davies and other sources of information about the way Brahms played and about what's called performance practice, and that's it. So, here, I don't know if you can see it well. Can you see this? Okay. Yeah. Good. There are many sources, but this is a very good kind of compendium of different things sort of put into one place in a very intelligent way. It's performing Brahms, just in case you didn't see it well, early evidence of performing style, and it's edited by Michael Musgrave and Bernard Sherman. It's a very good source just to have at home, I would say, so you can refer to it or share it with your friends. Okay, so that's that. Now, I move to Brahms once again to explain this elasticity of tempo and how that reflects structure and creates emotion. So let's go here first. Again, we look at the sonatas, of course. That's so. We'll first go to the first sonata, F minor, and we take from here, where is it? Measure, 36, 37, 38. And it's this place. And before I explain what I'm talking about elasticity, I actually have to talk about markings. And I do believe that I mentioned this much earlier, but this, I really want to point this out now. And this has to do with the fact that if you look at his manuscripts, the working manuscripts, and we are very, very fortunate that we have them, that they were not destroyed like Brahms generally did, but that he gave them to his wonderful friend Richard Mühlfeld. If you may, those of you who were here from the very beginning may remember me talking about that. And in these manuscripts, we see much more clearly not only his process of composition, but how carefully he delineated structure with his markings. And that is very much the issue of these hairpins that we have. So here, in this case, we have something very, very clear. And we have, this starts out this way. have here, and in every edition, actually, these hairpins are incorrect. Right here. So that the second hairpin that goes down starts clearly on the clarinet E flat, on the there. Now, why is this important? In editions, generally it starts earlier, and in the recapitulation of the piece, which is starting measure 153, and the hairpins are in 159, 160, 158, and those hairpins are a complete mess, in fact, in every edition. And in fact, they are the same in his manuscript as they were in the exposition. The only difference is that in the recapitulation, his bar lines are not quite as straight as they were, so his actual notation is a little bit slanted. So that these hairpins are not in a straight line, but a little bit slanted themselves. And what happened when they were printed, and in fact before that, when the copyist made the fair copy, or Stichverlag as it's called, the copyist actually took those markings literally and did not understand that in fact they delineated structure. And because of that, even though they were a little bit skewed, they should, if you straighten out the measures, they should be straightened out as well. Anyway, enough of that. So, we come back to this. And why is this so important? It's because Brahms, who was very mathematical, in fact, there's I wasn't able to find my volume. Maybe it's here. This is interesting. Hold it. I wonder if I did. No, I don't think I found it. If I find it later, I'll in another streams I'll actually show you. But there's one it's called Devil's Dictionary. Can you hear me? Yeah. This is very squeaky, right? I know, it's terribly squeaky. That's right. That's,
lose weight.
I tried WD-40 on it, and didn't quite work. I think I need to do a lot more, but for that I have to wear a mask. Oh no. Never. Anyway, the Devil's Dictionary, and they're very different quotes of many different things, and one thing had to do with Brahms. This was a concert in Boston, and if I remember correctly, it was of this A major, the second of his serenades. That's and that review of the concert was scathing and wrote that Brahms' music is just dry mathematics. Interesting. Yeah. I'll find the exact quote and bring it later. I mean, maybe some of you already know this. But in any case, this is what we mean by the expressiveness of structure, the expressiveness, in say, of mathematics. It's actually, I would say, not even mathematics, but arithmetic, simply. So, Brahms, in this piece, has his threes, and they come in different guises. So there's a small three and large three here. So in this case, we start with the large three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Then again, 1. And then 1, 2, and then you see. So as he sets up an introduction with the large three, then the small threes have a sense of motion. And then with his hairpins, and he delineates in his hairpins the fact that this is a big three, despite the bass, which in a certain way contradicts that hemiola. So he doesn't do this. But and what does that mean for structure here and expressiveness? This is actually a fantastic example of that. You think I should have another chair? I know here it's unbelievably loud, I must say. In any case, I'll try to control myself. Yes, I know. I just move too much. Yeah. In any case, so we have the large three here. Into, and that's why the hairpins move exactly to that point in his manuscript. And instead of just we have a kind of area here. And the hairpin is already resolving itself when the bass comes in. And that creates a tremendously poignant moment in this. And then we continue. So, this shows once again this expansion, contraction, and greater expansion that Brahms is composing into this piece. And for a performer, if we play simply like this, so here, so 1. Miss the point completely. So here is another great example of flexible tempo. So something moves and something stretches this way, and this creates this wonderfully poignant expression in this piece. And then going on, he writes ben marcato, and that implies very different kind of music from before, and different sense of three. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. And then and after that, again, he expands once again. So we have so this expands this way. of this. You find them throughout this piece, and not only throughout this piece, throughout all of Brahms' compositions. But somehow in these clarinet sonatas, they're very, very clear. That way. Now we even go to a different kind of hairpin. These small hairpins, where we have this first. And these hairpins also are not simply, but are indications of a heightened expression. So, and then again, three. So it's 1, 2, 3, and then we go on. Okay. So this is this kind of elasticity we're talking about. I go into something else, and that has to do with the fact that Brahms takes something, and then rather than creating sections, which are here, he overlaps. And that's important to understand. So for instance there, we are actually moving to C minor from there. That way. So his beginnings are also his endings. And this is something very important to understand, because very often we'll find in Brahms something that may feel awkward in the transition, or something that, oh, here's this, and then it's that way. And I will move, show that perhaps in better detail in a moment. But here is again, that way. So he moves into a different kind of sense of expression and sense of rhythm also. So there's this stretching here, and then it moves to this C minor. And one very interesting feature that we have in these pieces especially is that it's as if he gives a very small outline, or it can even say a hint of what's going to happen, and then he does it. So we have this, and that starts to develop. And of course, this is what we call developing variation, and I'm not really going to get into this technically, but we feel that something keeps developing here. And once again, he goes in threes, and then he has a kind of statement at the end. So we have here. And then, oh, what's next? Next. Then we have, and then, oh. You see. So we have this three developing from the beginning and creating greater and greater harmonic tension, and then this. And again, that's a kind of announcement, in a way, of what's going to happen. Then he continues in a larger sense, as I imagine, and then he goes again. And then once again, I'm sorry, this one. And then he goes. This way. So this kind of, again, kind of expansion of it. One thing. What is that? No? Yes?
That's okay. So somewhere's noise, but that's all gone now.
Oh, God, okay. Maybe outside, yeah. So, again, even in this larger sense, he starts in the small way, just as he did here, and then expands there. We start with this here, and it keeps building, and then finally, in canon, and then continue, and then keeps going, and even here we have. Then should go, and at this point he just goes back. And that should. So from here we have this going to this. Then we should go here. So this, which we think is new, actually comes out of that. He just doubles back rather than going. Rather than being literal. And what is interesting here is his hairpin. That he writes forte in the beginning, and then he has a hairpin going to forte. So you wonder, what does that mean? And of course, that is because we start here, and again we have. That's our C minor that we're constantly trying to get to, where. So we start there. That's why I said, but then. Then he redevelops the same idea that started from here, this from this that way to and again. Sorry. So why am I explaining all of this in this kind of haphazard way? Just because as performers, we should sort of look at this and then start to feel how Brahms, this developing idea, actually creates the expression, and that demands kind of flexibility of tempo. So that here, we start here, and then that is stable, because that is supposed to arrive to, but he doesn't. And then 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. So again, he's stretched. He's going from the small 3 to this big 3 sort of thing, then coming back to the small 3 this way. Okay. I go to the end of this movement. And this point, there's so much to talk about, but I think I just start from here. So we're feeling that this ritornando that he's making again creates great expression, and that expression is in this structure, which is basically a kind of expansion of 3 throughout. And the ending from here. See that, we understand why he does this. Where he could have done Hemiola at the end creates the final expression of this piece. Now, there's an interesting detail in his manuscript, and that has to do with measure 222 to 223. And that is this place here, where in the clarinet both in the clarinet part and in the piano score, and I believe that the clarinet part looks like a different handwriting, as if it is Mühlfeld's writing and not Brahms' writing, but I don't know for sure. I'm no expert in that at all. And what he has starting here, from this divide, he writes poco a poco, and then he has a line straight on that bar line. He has another line here, and then in tempo. And this poco a poco is together with this hairpin going to the forte. There. And it's the same in the clarinet part, this written clarinet part, and in the score. So this is very interesting in terms of looking at the meaning of the hairpin itself, because he's emphasizing the fact that for here, sorry, wow, why do I play so badly? And then we start to move. So, as the rhythmic motion becomes more agitated, it moves forward, and then this kind of mathematical slowing down of three. But I would never say this is dry mathematics. On the contrary, the mathematics and the structure and the emotion are all the same. Yeah. So, you see the emotion in a certain way is within the mathematics. Okay. I know I'm spending much too much time on this, but I still want to go on to the second movement just a little bit. And the opening of that movement is very interesting, and also the tempo marking. And I mentioned this before, but I just want to go over it in greater detail to show what is happening here. So, first of all, his tempo is andante un poco adagio, and that's a little bit unusual for Brahms, as I have mentioned before. I think I'm saying that a lot because I'm sort of repeating myself. Because Brahms generally, initially, would write something more either complicated or more descriptive, and then he would get rid of it because he expected that the people who would look at his music would be musical enough, educated enough, and sensitive enough to understand without an extra marking that way. But here he kept it this way. In the quintet, we have his original marking is allegro moderato in the first movement, ma molto appassionato. And then he crossed all of that out and wrote allegro. But in the third movement, again, he had to keep it, and somehow his colorful marking, and the trio of that, the middle section, is presto, non assai, ma con sentimento. So you wonder, well, it should be very fast, but not really, but it should have a sentiment with it. And this is not for me to talk about now, why it is that way, but he did feel this way. Here, allegro un poco adagio, not allegro, what am I talking about? Oh, that's terrible. Andante un poco adagio. It's like, okay, and andantes are kind of walking, andante, the tempo, but kind of slow. This kind of qualifier is there. And why did he feel that he needs this? Okay, first, small detour. And for that, we start out in this movement this way. general, oops, I'm sorry, kind of even from all of that. This is from Opus 119, or the quintet, where you have this. Again, it's kind of very colorful language, chordal language, which in his late periods we see, and we don't really find that earlier. And I just put this out because it's something I have no information about, but with Brahms, he's always listening. Perhaps he heard something like that in this very early ragtime music. Okay. It's a kind of pre-segue to what I will be talking about here. But now we come back to this. It's actually a very simple harmonic progression where we have that way, but colored in a way. So what he's doing, though, is he is anticipating the next measures harmonically. So although we're in A flat here, we have this, which comes from the second measure. This is, and then the E flat that we have in the bass is from the third measure, and then goes. So that middle point there, and then we go to F minor, but the E flat there is in the next measure, from the next measure. And then it's more normal. Also a different kind of motion. And this motion that we have is not inside the measure, but between measures. So again, this harmonic structure, which has been in a certain way compressed, actually creates a special kind of rhythm which is maybe not so regular. So we start this way, and then this is next measure. This is the same measure, but next measure. And then back into next measure. And then next measure. And then it's more straight, of course. That way. But I always hear this piece sort of kind of a nice, but there's something always missing. And I think it's because of this very special rhythm which his harmonic language implies. And there's one more detail in this, of course, that this comes from our chorale, which I've talked about so often. And then there's also that, which turns out to be Clara's theme, which he borrowed from Robert Schumann. This was the way that Schumann named his wife in his music, and Brahms used this also. But what does that mean in terms of this piece? Now, we can fantasize, and again, this is just imagination, and read something which is probably not at all into this piece. And that is that, of course, this comes from the chorale, and if I must depart, do not depart from me. And then we have also Clara's theme. So a kind of message to Clara, perhaps, do not depart from me. I'm sure I'm going to get into trouble with all sorts of music historians and musicologists about this, but I don't care. It's just a way of sparking imagination when we are looking at pieces this way. Of course, you know, it comes after Clara's theme. And this is exactly the same. Is Clara's theme, and then he combines the two there that way. Okay, so we look here, and we see this very special motion which moves this way. Now we go to the middle part, and I explained earlier, last week, I guess that's earlier. It seems like yesterday, of course, but the overall harmonic interest in this movement. But now we go to rhythm, and here we have this, of course. From here, this middle part, and then this. Again, there's a very big 3 in that. Okay, but my point is that, in fact, these, as he marks with his dynamics, are not, in fact, connected in a way. So each one is a kind of reverie on a particular note, or a particular word, we can say, from the chorale, from the St. Matthew Passion, or something of that sort. So here, also that kind of very much opposite from here. Okay. What time is it now? That's my question. Do we?
A little before 11 o'clock?
Okay. So I think I have to go on.
Yeah, good.
In fact, I should. So I show a little bit about this, and I probably will return periodically to these pieces because they're so fascinating, and because I look at them myself, and of course I'm prejudiced, as not only his final instrumental works, but the culmination of his compositional craft, of his what he has spent his whole life in a certain way, building knowledge and building skill to actually fulfill his compositional ideal in a way. And we see this, at least I see this so clearly in these two pieces. It doesn't mean that these are his best pieces. No, he has many pieces that are best, and I don't try to say that at all. But in terms of the craft of composition, they really represent quite a pinnacle. Okay, so I already gave my segue in terms of perhaps the influence which ragtime had, even on in a way, on the second movement of this. And now I turn I have to do this. Here. Go back to ragtime music, to the beginnings of jazz, and to Sidney Bechet finally. And it is something that I've decided I probably will do in every one of these sessions, is give a small introduction to someone who should be very well known, but unfortunately to most of us is not. Okay, and I talked about Sidney Bechet, and now I want to speak about, first of all, James Reese Europe. He was born in 1881. Yeah. I've all this written down here, so I'm going like that. So I'll go up. Yes. Okay. Because these are all of everything I'm talking about now is very new for me, and something that I'm fascinated by and so impressed.
You had a picture?
I have in there. I will show that in a second. Yeah. James Reese Europe was one of the very first African American musicians who, I would say, not only promoted, he was a composer, he was also a violinist, he was and a pianist, and a conductor, and an impresario. He was one of the first who really looked to find and to promote what was a real, I would say, African American music that we have. Okay. and I'm not saying this very well, but it's really quite something. Let me get his picture first, I will say. And here we are. Okay, you have it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to just read a bit of this way, because his career was very short but very extraordinary, actually. Now, the great U.B. Blake was a pianist and composer who knew James Reese Europe. He wrote, he said that he was our benefactor and inspiration. Even more, he was the Martin Luther King of music. This is somebody who should be canonized. We should have statues to him throughout the United States, and not only the United States, and I'll explain. And there is, in fact, in France, a greater understanding and appreciation of him than there is in the United States. He was not only a composer and orchestrator and very brilliant musician, he was also an entrepreneur and a great organizer. So he was born in Mobile, Alabama in 1881. His family moved to Washington, D.C., and in 1904 moved to New York City. And he started out as a pianist and became a musical director for various vaudeville shows. In 1910, he formed what's called the Clef Club and became its president. This organization not only put together its own orchestra and chorus, but served as a union and contracting agency for black musicians. Soon it had as many as 200 men on its roster. This men, say, that's interesting. Should keep that in mind, though. This is, again, we're talking about history. And on May 2nd, 1912, and this is so interesting, the Clef Club Symphony Orchestra put on a concert of Negro music, as it was called, in Carnegie Hall. That concert was a tremendous success. The 125-man orchestra included a large contingent of banjos and mandolins and presented music exclusively by black composers. By this time, Europe believed that although black musicians respected white music of quality, they did not need to play or imitate it. Instead, they had their own music to play, which people of all races would and should want to hear. Now, he left the Clef Club in 1913 and formed another organization, the Temple Club. Now, this new club served much the same purpose as the Clef Club, and it was also a booking agency and booked for dances, etc., etc. And Europe formed a close association with a very popular dancing team, a duo called Vernon and Irene Castle. And they were very innovative and invented dances such as the turkey trot and also the foxtrot. And the foxtrot, of course, was something which took the world by storm. You had everywhere people dancing the foxtrot. That was invented very much by James Reese Europe. Okay, he made some recordings in 1914. I'm going to play something for you. And he says these recordings show that Europe's music was like no other music produced at that time or since. It was not, of course, it was not yet jazz. It was not really ragtime either. It was more complex. Right? And in World War I, James Europe signed up and was commissioned as a lieutenant for the 15th Regiment under Colonel Hayward. Colonel. He was ordered to put together the best band he could muster, and he did so. He went throughout the United States, even went to Puerto Rico, and he found the very best musicians that he could have. And his friend, whose name was Noble Sissel, and this is also a very important person. Noble Sissel was a drummer, percussionist, who then, in Europe, after the war, began to play with Sidney Bechet. So, this regiment that he started became the 369th Regiment, and they were known as the Hellfighters. And they proceeded to amaze continental Europe, especially France. And this is very important, because don't forget, this starts in 1914, and in France, and they said they amazed Europe with its brilliant and original music. Some French musicians, reading from the band's parts, tried to duplicate Europe's band sound, but could not. And that only created greater admiration. And in fact, some people thought that the Europe's musicians that were playing on some special kinds of instruments, because they were getting sounds that they had never heard before from them. But of course they were not. They were just very normal. And in an interview, Europe graciously acknowledged this appreciation, and it attributed to the fact that his musicians played their own black music. Europeans, he argued, simply recognized his music as good because it was original and was intrinsically worthy as music. He was actually welcomed in the United States, and he came back in 1919 as a hero. That's 369th Regiment also experienced combat, and Europe was in fact the first African American in the First World War to experience combat. So this is but in 1919, he went back to, in a way, his old life, but just before a show that he was supposed to do in Boston, one of the members of his band, he had an argument. They struggled, and the fellow pulled out a knife, and Europe was killed. It was a terrible tragedy. So let me play a little bit of Europe's and his. Let's see how this works. Okay. Today I'm not very flexible somehow. Okay. And I didn't. Yeah, here we go. Okay, this is 1913. And this is Europe Society Orchestra, December 29th, 1913, this recording. There we go. in this music there were 5 banjo mandolins, 3 violins, clarinet, cornet, trumset, and drums, and 2 pianists. Okay. And then let me do this. It takes so much time. And I think I have to turn the sound on here, no? Maybe I don't. We'll see. It's connected. Let's see if this works. Nope. Let's try again. Okay. Let's try this again and then do this. Yeah, I think this should work now. Sorry. Wrong thing. Oh. Let's connect again. Let's try again. No.
What's going on?
I'm so sorry. Why doesn't this work? I'm annoyed. I apologize for this, but it's my, let's see. No, I think that should work. Okay, I just play this around. Anyway, okay, that's it. So that's a bit of that. It's wonderful. There are a few other recordings of him. And now I move to another person. before that, I should just read a nice quote by Gunther Schuler. He's a wonderful French horn player, composer, also organizer, entrepreneur, and a great friend of my father, I should say, that's as well. So I remember him from when I was just about a baby. In any case, he wrote that Europe had stormed the bastion of the white establishment and made many members of New York's cultural elite aware of Negro music for the first time. It's a very, very important person for the world of music in general. And the influence that he had in France is very important for the influence that his music and then ragtime music and jazz had on the direction of classical music. Okay, now the next person I talk about is Will Marion Cook. I'd have a photo of him who was, let's see if this is not very good quality, but you can sort of see him. And his dates were 1869 to 1944. And he's also one of the most important figures in the very beginning of jazz, ragtime music, and African American music in general. Just like Europe, he was a conductor, he was a composer, performer, and an entrepreneur and producer. One interesting detail is that in the famous 1912 concert in Carnegie Hall, Marion played in the orchestra that Europe conducted. And then he went about and organized in 1919 the Southern Syncopated Orchestra, which I spoke briefly about last week. And that was also the orchestra where Sidney Bechet made his European debut and where Ernest Ansermet gave him this fantastic review, which I read. Okay, I will just read his biography. This is, again, all of this is so new for me, and something that I'm going to be researching more and more. He was born actually to middle-class parents in 1869. His father was one of the first class of students at Howard University Law School in Washington, D.C. It was one of the first, as it was then, black or African American universities. And he went on to become the school's first dean. But his father died in 1879, and then he went and then Will Marion Cook went with his mother around, and Cook, when he was 15, began to study violin. I'm sorry. He's actually studied earlier, but he went to Oberlin when he was 15 years old, college, to study violin. Now, the great man, I would say, Frederick Douglass, helped organize a fundraiser and sent Cook to study in Europe. And there he studied with Joseph Joachim. So this is another connection to Brahms. And I wouldn't be surprised if he met Brahms. This is another interesting little connection which should be a bit more explored. when he returned to the U.S. in 1890, he wanted to continue his career as a classical violinist, but was, for many reasons, not able to do that. And that had a lot to do with prejudice of the time, of course. But instead, what he decided to do was to actually create his own concerts and go away from classical music to actually promote again African American music. That was in this way. He became a very prominent songwriter as well, and also wrote music for what's it called, the Southerners. So this is all these things I don't really know, but I'm just reading for the first time. In 1904, and that was the first Broadway show to feature a racially integrated cast. And what we need to know is, well, I'd say in 1910 he became contributing member of New York's Clef Club. That was the club that was organized, founded by Europe. And after actually taking a lead from that great concert in 1912, he went on to form, first it was the New York Syncopated Orchestra, and then the Southern Syncopated Orchestra was renamed, and for that he toured around the United States finding the best players, and in Chicago at that time he found Sidney Bechet. Now Cook was also a great teacher and was one of the teachers of Duke Ellington. So, and this is very interesting. You see, Ellington acknowledged his debt to Cook, noting when he needed direction for developing a theme, he asked Cook for advice, and Cook told him, "You know, you should go to the conservatory, but since you won't, I'll tell you. First you find the logical way, and when you find it, avoid it. Let your inner self break through and guide you. Don't try to be anybody but yourself." And of course, Ellington really took this to heart, and that advice helped him find himself as the genius which he was. I can just write here, this is, Cook also followed his own advice, and Thomas Rees was, in his study of early black musical theater, this is again someone I don't know, but it's a nice quote, singles out Cook's remarkable harmonic skill and compositional sophistication. And he perhaps paved the way for the marriage of popular spirit and classical complexity, which became jazz. So this is someone else who again should be canonized, and yet he is in virtual society, to say, he's pretty much unknown now. I mean, of course there are people who do know him, but I didn't know him, and in the classical world he should be known, and he should be respected, and he should be studied, but of course hasn't really happened yet. Okay, so I will play something here as well. Let's see. Okay. So I get rid of that one. And should want to play also one more thing. But I think I play this first. Yeah, here. Uh-oh. Here. Let's see if I get this here. It's not working. I don't know why this all gets stuck now, but anyway, this is not great. Okay, so anyway, that's a little bit of that. Was there something that I should answer particularly now? Advice to young students. Okay, I will end this with advice to young students. Okay, so remind me just today. Okay, so I move now to Sidney Bechet, and where's my here? Of course, I gave already an introduction to him, and he is also one of the most remarkable musicians. I forget if I mentioned last week or not that I read that already in 1908 he began playing together with Louis Armstrong. They would on a kind of truck that's in the back. They played together and went around the town of went around New Orleans. Now that's actually very remarkable because Bechet himself would have been 11 years old, and Armstrong would have been only 7. That's rather mind-boggling, I would say. And already, of course, when Bechet was 12, he was very well known throughout New Orleans. And I want to say a few quotations. This is another interesting kind of quite nice sort of introduction to these very important, very early people in jazz. I'll give you, it's another book. Here it goes. This is Whitney Balliet, Jelly Roll, Jabbo, and Fats. 19 Portraits in Jazz. And this little section about Bechet is quite, it's not quite nice. That's where I found the quotation from Answer Me, by the way. It's in this. Now, speaking about Duke Ellington, in 1924, Bechet played with Ellington. And Ellington, as he said, never got over Bechet's great lyrical bent. He was also very, very impressed with him. But Bechet never spent a long time with anything, any place really, and he left Ellington rather quickly though, and he went with Josephine Baker on a long tour of Europe, and that he toured Russia and throughout Western Europe. He was in Berlin, he was of course in Paris, he was in Vienna, he went many, many places. And it was in 1928, of course, I mentioned this also, where he got into a fight over a modulation with this American banjoist, was Little Mike McKendrick, and he challenged him to a duel with guns, of course, and Bechet grazed McKendrick. There was also a pianist there, Grover Compton. He wounded him in the leg, and also wounded this French woman who was there. Well, this was, sorry, in Paris. I didn't mention this so clearly. And he was, yes, I know, I'm down here, up. He went, after he was spent 11 months in jail, and then after that, he went to Berlin, and then came back to the U.S., worked again a little bit with Duke Ellington, and he had met a trumpet player, Tommy Ladnier, his name was, and with the pianist also, they made several recordings for Victor's, for the record company Victor. And this is very interesting little vignette that when the Depression hit the United States, they actually quit music and started a little store in Harlem called the Southern Tailor Shop. And Bechet actually worked a bit as a tailor, and his friend Ladnier was the ironed the clothes. But in the back, they always played this way, in their back room there. But this is what is interesting here. And I quote this. When the drummer Zutty Singleton arrived in New York from Chicago in 1937, he moved into the building Bechet and Ladnier shared quarters in. Singleton once said, they called their place the House of Meditation, and they had a picture of Beethoven on the wall. One day Ladnier said to Bechet, you know something, Bechet? You look just like Beethoven. And that pleased Bechet, of course. Now, Bechet and Ladnier would stand in front of a big mirror and watch themselves when they practiced. They listened to classical music on record, and they talked a lot about their travels. This is, it's interesting to see that they had a very broad education, even though Bechet basically didn't go to school. And it's something I always believed myself, that you get your best education once you're out of school. And this would be young students. Yes. But don't take me too seriously. Then here, I have something about this here. The saxophone is this way. Yeah. He was also a teacher, and he actually opened a music school in 1946. And this is what someone wrote about his lessons. This is very interesting. Sidney would run off a complex series of phrases and leave me alone in his room for a couple of hours to wrestle with what he had played. One lesson could easily take up an entire afternoon, and Sidney favored giving a lesson every day. Look, when you emphasize a note, you throw your whole body into it, he would say, cutting a wide arc with his horn as he slashed into the phrase. I'm going to give you one note today, he once told me. See how many ways you can play that one note. Growl it, smear it, flatten it, sharpen it, do anything you want. That's how you express your feelings in music. It's like talking. Try to complete your phrases and your ideas. There are lots of otherwise good musicians who sound terrible because they start a new idea without finishing the last one. Okay, this is also, and this is most important, and a connection in a certain sense with Brahms. This is the wonderful musician Bob Wilbur wrote about Bechet. One thing he was very interested in was the concept of interpreting a song. You start out with an exposition of the melody in which you want to bring out the beauty of it. And then you start your variations, but at first they are closely related to the melody. Then as you go on to another chorus, you go further away, you do something a little less based on the melody, but more on the harmony. Sidney was much more harmonically oriented than most of the players of his generation. Then at the end you would come back to the melody, and there would be some kind of coda which would bring everything to a conclusion. The idea of form was very important to him, you see. So, we have developing variation in the improvisations of Sidney Bechet. Okay. So I didn't get to Stravinsky, but I'm going to give you just a brief little prelude to what I will start with next week. And that has to do with this. You can see, okay, which you're wondering, what is that? And with a little duet, yes, I will say, I will not, yeah, okay. I know, none of this was working today. But anyway, I will come back to that. Yeah, okay. So, the little duet which Stravinsky wrote, which is called Lied ohne Name. It should be, of course, Lied ohne Namen, but I think Stravinsky's German was not so great, in fact. But he wrote this, and this little piece for two bassoons And I'm playing it now a half step too high, but okay, that's Lied ohne Name. And the reason for playing this now, you will understand next week. Now, I'd like to just answer this question, which is, once again, I'll read exactly that. This is advice to young student clarinet players. Okay. First of all, I'll say that I'm talking now about history, about philosophy, about all sorts of nonsense like that. But I will soon actually speak about technique in the clarinet, about all the stuff that clarinetists are interested in, even double tonguing, circular breathing, all of that. So I haven't forgotten about that, and I will do some classes or live streams, I should say, which are more focused specifically on clarinet technique and expression. But what I would say in general for young clarinet students is, first of all, listen to a wide range of music and find in yourselves a passion for music, because music cannot be something that we simply choose because we think that it's a good idea, perhaps, although that's a possibility. And, at one time, everybody studied music because this was part of one's basic education. And if you were not literate in music, somehow something was wrong. And it would be wonderful if that could be the case again. And of course, we do have advertisements for schools, I've even seen, where they're saying about music education is good for your brain. I think that's actually very true. It's very good for our brains. But you have to find a passion for music. And we should listen to many kinds of music. I would say that I was very much, in a sense, blessed that I came from a musical family, and my father had very, very broad tastes in music, although he was not really into jazz. That's why I'm such a latecomer to all of that. But in terms of contemporary music at that time, the music of Stravinsky, the music of Schoenberg, the music of Weber, the music of Boulez, the music of Carter, the music of Babbitt, and the music of Martinu and Villa-Lobos, and many of these people he knew, in fact, that I grew up with this music, Oliver Messiaen. So from a very early age, new music and old music seemed to be equivalent to me. That it's not like one was somehow easy and melodic and one was sort of weird and no. So I think that from an early age we need to get to train our ears. I know I'm not doing well. I'm going down all the time. I just go down. I'm getting lower and lower and lower. No, I don't have to raise my body. If I play, I raise. Okay. I know I'm being admonished not to go off in so many tangents. Anyway, so to find your passion in music and to realize also that the discipline of music is something which will be very important for you no matter what you do in life. That you don't have to say, oh, I'm doing music because I'm going to be a performer, I'm going to be a musician. You don't have to be a musician to gain from music. But the discipline that's necessary for actually accomplishing something in music and for getting better and training yourself, that kind of training, which is in many ways even more comprehensive than sports training, is something which you will carry with you for your whole life. I had an interesting experience teaching some youngsters who were very smart, and they were in school. They were used to being able to do everything very quickly. And they came to the instrument, though, and they realized that that was impossible. And they became very frustrated, because they were good in math, they were good in this and that, so everything went very fast for them. But here, they realized they needed discipline. And some didn't realize that, in fact, and they became very frustrated and left music. And, well, they're worse off for that, of course. But the discipline that's necessary, there's no way that you can accomplish something in music or become literate in music, I would say, without the discipline of working methodically, you say. And with that in mind, I have to mention, this was in Carnegie Mellon. This is now probably more than 10 years ago already. I read in the New York Times that there was a study done. This was in Carnegie Mellon. And that study was trying to find the difference between what they mentioned were good musicians and what they mentioned were world-class musicians. This is all I started reading, and I thought, well, this is nonsense. And as I read more about this, the only difference they found was in total number of hours practiced. I thought, well, they didn't have to go through a big study. They could have just called me. But in any case, there is an element of truth in that, and that is that you need to have the discipline to practice and to feel that little by little you make improvements that way. I don't know if I really answered the question, but I will answer this more and more as these live streams go on. Now, I do want to end, though, with a recording. I know I'm taking much too much time, and people can leave, of course. This is the advantage of doing the live stream, because I'm here in this emptiness, just imagining what's happening out there. So I can imagine all I want. And something this is Sidney Bechet, one of his very last recordings. And this is actually, it's with the French pianist Claude Bolling and orchestra. And this is also a video, so I'm going to show it to you. You can see. It was 1 year before he died. With that, thank you for putting up with me. Be well. Be engaged.